All right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar, Closing the Loop, Managing Travel Fraud in Chaotic Times, as part of our third annual Fraud Month series. Just before we get started, I just want to make you all aware of the fact that you can ask questions. You can type those in. If you look at your screen, there's the control panel with the tab to questions. Just feel free to type your questions in there, and we'll try and take them throughout the webinar. But we have a dedicated time as well at the end. As always, as it's always asked, if we're going to share these slides out, yes, we will be, and you'll be able to find them on our website after this session at rcorp.com. Also note that we have some more webinars coming on this month, with the next being tomorrow, and then two more later towards the end of the month as well, the 23rd and 24th. But for now, let's get this show on the road, and allow me to introduce you to my co-hosts. I myself, I am Cornelius Hutson. I'm the Director for Revenue Integrity at ARC, and I shall have Doug and Jennifer do a quick introduction of themselves.
Hi, I'm Doug Nass, the Director of Fraud Investigations here at ARC, and hope you enjoyed today's webinar and the rest of the webinars this week. Jennifer.
And I'm Jennifer Watkins. I'm Director of Payments. Welcome back. For those who are joining us for the second webinar, we're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And with us today on the panel, we have a fountain of knowledge in our colleagues from Chargebacks, 9/11, and Priceline. And I will allow them to do their own introductions real quick. Monica.
Hi, I'm Monica Eaton, and I am the co-founder and COO of Chargebacks 911.
And I'm Harlan Hutson. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Brands, and glad to be here.
Hello, my name is Michael Balchiusfor, and I'm the Senior Manager for Priceline.com as it relates to chargebacks.
Hi, Brandon Shorts here. Happy to be here, and I'm Senior Manager of Fraud for Priceline.com. And with that, I'll kick it back to Cornelius.
Thanks for that, Brandon. And fantastic. I'm very pleased to have this discussion with you all as we investigate some key areas impacting the travel industry. We start off our session here today with a reflection on what we anticipated 2020 would look like. Of course, we all set great objectives for the year. We put our budgets out, we had growth plans, etc. But then, you know, COVID-19 came along and changed that reality for us and forced us to pivot. So we'll also be looking at what that means for us, and what happened to fraud. We look at both the impact of criminal and friendly fraud during this time, and how to mitigate fraud by using our own data. We also want to go through some best practices and how to adapt our operations and create opportunities to reduce revenue losses in this new normal. Moving on, let's reflect on our 2020 objectives, and we'll be looking here at some of the airline trends. And Harlan, if you'd be so kind as to just take us through this slide.
Yeah, sure. Lots of things happened. As you know, I was looking recently at the TSA throughput for 2020. We suffered a low on April 14th of 87,000 TSA screenings. Can you imagine that? 87. The previous year was 2 million plus. I'm happy to say, as of September 7th, I think we almost reached 1 million, still down nearly half. And so we're still suffering the effects. But you can see by the chart here that this has been a massive, massive problem for not just airlines, but travel companies throughout the world. It's a global problem with canceled trips in China, Hong Kong, you know, all trips at the 91% rate in China, going all the way down to domestic travel. Then you've got the most trips canceled, some trips. The bottom line is everybody was affected. And whether you're a travel and tour operator, an OTA, or an airline, we've all felt the impact. And this, I think, necessitates and we should be paying attention to fraud and chargebacks, obviously. But I think this in and of itself should heighten our awareness of revenue leakage. How are we losing revenue? How are we dealing with preventing that loss in the first place, right? So I think that's the exciting part of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks for that, Harlan. And Doug, I think we on the wrong slide. Would you mind going back up one or two to number 5? Yeah, that's it. Perfect. Yeah, thanks for that, Harlan. Of course, we see these trends here as well. And of course, from a fraud perspective, we've also clearly identified that there was for 2020 at least, there was big projections for fraud, and that we were all anticipating a major jump in fraud activity as people were shifting to more e-commerce and also card not present environments. But you know, as we reached sort of mid-March, that trend started to change significantly as our transaction volume started to nosedive, and you know, things change. And you know, what came next was COVID. You know, so if we can go to the next one, Doug. You know, with COVID, you know, we clearly see the transactions dive sort of mid-March through April and continue on a flat trend throughout to where we are today, mainly due to restrictions on entering countries, flight cancellations, policy changes, and almost a dead stop to air travel as we know it, right? So, so we were really just left to hang out to dry and sort of deal with a new reality there. Onto the next one, Doug, please. And then this is the next slide is where, Harlan, you pivoted quite well. Thank you for that, as we landed on the wrong one. But yeah, so thanks for that. And yeah, absolutely to your point, Doug, if you can move to the next one. Of course, business travel severely impacted here. We can see how people have made their decisions, and you've just touched on that, so I won't belabor that point. But this is just another example as to how fast the world had changed. You know, it was literally within days, weeks that things have significantly gone down, and things as our systems were placed into reverse gear whilst we were still, you know, riding the high of a positive start in 2020. It really shook us. And so everyone had to react to this reality and figure things out, and had to do it pretty quick. So, you know, we're going to look and see now how people sort of adopted to it, and how best they could to do as well as they could with little warning to the industry in this. And if we move on to that next slide, of course, everyone struggled to adapt and understand the impact COVID had to their business and what they must do to maintain, you know, their status quo and also the health of their business, and ensure that they can ride out this pandemic. Initially set to only be a couple of months, and 6 months down the line, we are seeing second waves hit in international markets, and you know, things are sort of slightly getting worse before they're going to get better. And it placed a great deal of strain on our policies and procedures and those of the airlines as well. And we see that in the way the airlines had to work to bring the best solutions possible for them, but also for the agency community and the customer. It wasn't necessarily always the most favorable decisions in the policy changes, and there's still some controversy around that, but everybody had to make those decisions to benefit, or at least to ensure continuity of their business downstream. And it was, and it was still as important for everyone in the travel value chain to be mindful of the customers, being that they had to communicate with the customer, ensuring they're keeping them informed of these changes, and of course, adapting and adopting these new policies at lightning speed as they were being made and changed almost on a weekly basis. So it's important to maintain an open dialogue, you know, as always, as these things change with customers. You know, with the core piece there to be open communication sort of helps relax people a little bit. And, you know, in our world, it sort of helps to prevent chargebacks and potentially double refunds as well. So let's look at this form of fraud, you know, going forward as we look into the new, and move on to the next slides, please, about criminal and friendly fraud. You know, opportunities, next one, Doug. Thanks, Stu. Opportunities always arise in a time of crisis, and there is always someone out there ready to take advantage of the situation. Fraudsters are out there waiting and planning their next scheme, and yes, they were also impacted by COVID, and they need to recover as well as every other business here. So be on the lookout for fraud in the systems, and they are finding new ways to doing it. Of course, most recently, some ransomware incidences within the travel market. But Brandon, I want to hear from you guys. How did you guys pivot here? How did you guys start managing fraud from Priceline's perspective?
Yeah, so as mentioned, you know, early in the year, everything was pretty much turned on its head. So from a fraud perspective, once you know, very risky order characteristics, they're now the norm, right? So the difficulty lies therein. You need to be able to separate the fraud population from your good customers. So you need to, you know, we need to use you know, all applicable attributes such as you know, behavioral data, which, you know, that can include device characteristics, you know, IP geolocation, and actual, you know, customer activity as they interface with your website. And then you have the, you know, your surface details as well that you need to pay attention to, which is, you know, your customer history. So you need to keep tabs on, you know, if something looks completely out of place from you know, their normal history, and then also the, you know, the billing details as it relates to the travel. Because, you know, with everything that's happening, the travel patterns are changing, right? So we've definitely noticed a much shorter advanced purchase with the travel booking. So if you do have a manual review team, you know, the time that they have to review and vet transactions, it's much less. You need to be able to review transactions much quicker than normal. We also noticed that, you know, that the trips are occurring closer to home. Obviously, you know, customers want to be comfortable in their travel, and you know, they don't, you know, in these times they don't really want to get too far from home. Excuse me. We've also noticed that debit card usage is definitely on the increase, and that, you know, it might be something as simple as you know, our customers, they want to keep close tabs on their funds. So, you know, something to look for there as well, because you know, the mix of credit versus debit used to be you know, much more different than it is today. And then next we have the, you know, travel restrictions. You know, they're constantly loosening and tightening. So with that, you need to be in close contact with your front end teams to make sure that the policy is updated on your website. You know, you obviously want to give your customers the most up-to-date information. And then lastly, Cornelius, you know, as you touched on, we've definitely seen phishing and ransomware attempts on the rise. So, you know, fraudsters they'll try to take advantage any way they can, and we are definitely seeing an increase there.
Yeah, no, definitely an area to be aware of. Harlan, Monica, do you guys, what have you guys seen from Chargebacks 911 perspective, and how fraudsters have taken advantage of the crisis?
You know, I think we have we've definitely redefined a new normal, and it's sort of, I would look at it as, you know, if I let my daughter eat cookies for breakfast every morning and there's no consequence, she's never going to eat anything else. And what we have is, you know, a scenario where, you know, we have more and more consumers are learning to file chargebacks, and there's not any consequence for filing a chargeback because, frankly, with COVID, the banks are overwhelmed. the airlines are overwhelmed. So as a result, many consumers, may have, and then also you think the banks have digitized that process. So as a result, you have something that is very efficient with no consequence that gives an instant reward because, if you're using the right bank, then you're going to see money in your account almost immediately. And, and many consumers, even though, most are honest, they're not aware because there is no consequence. And then you have the overwhelm in the industry where, the card associations haven't given leniency in extending timeframes. So many airlines have not been able to keep up with the amount of unexpected chargebacks. Banks on both sides aren't able to keep up with the unexpected volumes. So we're really creating kind of a negative habit unintentionally. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult to, retrain that habit. So I think, we're seeing more, I would say, opportunistic fraud. And statistically, a few interesting facts. I think, what we see in the travel space, specifically with airlines, the average transaction for a chargeback started going up, which is what we would expect because consumers are feeling less secure, they're suffering, and this was a predicted expectation. However, now we're seeing that transaction is, leveling a little bit down, but we're seeing the time span from the originating transaction date until now is actually increasing dramatically, which tells us what's happening is we have created this new habit because there hasn't been the due diligence and the standards and the ability to create friction on the back end to help, balance this equation. So consumers are probably now looking at, opportunities to recover funds from a year back, a year and a half back. And that's becoming, I think, it's a very dangerous thing to monitor. So lots of friendly fraud, for sure, but friendly fraud that behaves a little bit different. And then lastly, I think it creates, it actually more opportunity for friendly fraud because you also have conflicts between governments changing their rules. This is specifically relevant in Europe, where there's bonds that are in place, and then the bonds, maybe they're going to cover a certain amount of transactions, and then now that got shifted. So it's just a lot of changing rules in volatile environments that really make it a difficult thing to manage. And I will say, what is super important is just really making sure that you can kind of take that data that Brandon is talking about, creating more intelligence and really understanding, more about your chargebacks. And I think I was just going to ask Michael, because I know you deal with so much of this as well.
Right.
Just in terms of some of the tactics or statistics that you guys are seeing, if you're seeing different behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, ever since the start of this whole, craziness earlier in the year, obviously everything was turned upside down. But what we really saw with regards to chargeback receipts coming in was that, you really can't trust the reason code coming in. So when it comes in with a fraud reason code, we made a very concerted effort to really vet every single case, because we just felt with high call volumes and customer frustration and daily, sometimes hourly policy changes, within, airlines and other products within the travel space, that, there had to be more than obviously just truly fraudulent transactions. So the opportunity was really to, dive in with both feet and really see, the chargeback receipts coming in, what was really driving those? Was it a disagreement in, a customer's perception of a refund policy or a cancellation? I mean, did they try to call? Were they on hold for, hours at a time and just got frustrated and then, just, to your earlier point, attempted to, file a chargeback with a fraudulent reason code, basically, just out of sheer frustration. And, looking at all those drivers, that obviously caused the volume to increase, and then sharing that with the appropriate teams, the front end fraud teams, as you mentioned with Brandon, the attributes of a specific reservation to see if there was any outliers, if there was any patterns, and what we could do on the customer service side to provide a solution there. So when something like this happens, customers feel like they can get in touch with the merchant in a reasonable amount of time, because we all know life happens, pandemic or no pandemic. So these were the types of opportunities that we saw, and we'll kind of dive into that maybe a little bit further on as to where the real success we saw from a Priceline perspective.
Yeah. Michael, and it's probably a little bit more impactful in the travel industry when you're an agent, when there's a chargeback coming through, and you might not necessarily be the merchant of record, you're using the airline as the merchant of record, generating debit memos, etc. You really need to be on top of things when you're dealing with these chargebacks, because there's so much cost involved, back office cost involved when it comes to chargebacks resulting in debit memos, disputing debit memos, etc. That really becomes a drain on your costs if you don't manage it correctly.
Right.
Just to provide, totally agree, just some narrative on this slide, and I think this is like spot on with what you're saying. So many they're just looking at those reason codes. And the reality is, you really need to peel the onion layers in order to find out the true source. And what's difficult to consume with all of these statistics is the fact that you can have a friendly fraud chargeback. So this spectrum is showing, on one side, here's the criminal fraud that you can prevent with your fraud filter. But then there's a line that goes across, and to Michael's point, we're seeing so many chargebacks that it could have been avoided if the phone was just answered quicker, if the resolution was provided quicker. So, even though that's still a friendly fraud chargeback and it can be represented and recovered, it also qualifies as an error. And if you understand the feedback, you can help prevent those, which is really your goal.
Yeah, Monica, I might just sorry.
No, go ahead, Harlan.
I was just going to mention this is a great conversation, and I think above all of this, sort of as an umbrella, the opportunity for the merchants to learn and discover a little bit more about how the rules work was sort of presented to them during the pandemic. Early in April, I think it was, both Visa and MasterCard issued guidance, and it was primarily for the travel and entertainment space, where they talked about, okay, where does an issuer have dispute rights, for example? Those kinds of things, being, if you will, an expert. If you're going to do this yourself, you have to be an expert in the rules so that you understand how to, if you will, fight the friendly fraud, deal with all of the responses, understand the compelling evidence, all that kind of thing. And Visa and MasterCard gave this great guidance at the beginning of the pandemic. And I just think people weren't looking to educate themselves. So there's an opportunity always in these things to learn more and to then come to a place where you understand, how can I best respond to this?
Yeah. So just so the people on the phone know, ARC has some of that guidance published on our website. There's a special section about COVID-19, and we have links to the Q&As from the card brands. Now, they did several over time, and so we've kind of posted what we thought were the key pieces of information they needed to know to guide them in, what chargebacks to fight, which ones they need to accept, things like that.
Yeah. And I think one other factor to take in consideration here before we move on is not only is it the friendly fraud that's coming through here, but also because there might be a lack of communication between what the airlines are doing policy-wise on a refund exchange, etc., versus what the customer and the timeline it's taken for those policies to change and be put into effect, that the consumer loses faith in the process, and they trigger that chargeback, ultimately getting that double refund in. And that's another thing we need to be conscientious about. So, Doug, we can move on to the next slide, and then we can sort of discuss a little bit more about how do we mitigate, fraud? How do we deal with this moving forward? Another one, please, Doug. Yeah, thanks. So, Brandon, I know you guys are very proactive in this area. Can you give us we've touched on quite a bit here. Is there anything else that you want to, add here?
Yeah, so from our experience, as we've mentioned earlier, vetting the incoming chargebacks, it's absolutely because as we've found, if you do have machine learning as part of your fraud defenses, if you're not vetting incoming chargebacks, you might be teaching the model that bad fraudsters are actually the good customers. So it can become kind of a runaway train in terms of blocking your good customer base. We've found that as Monica mentioned, chargebacks, initiating chargebacks, it's becoming increasingly a learned behavior from customers. As mentioned, they might not want to wait in a long hold time to try to cancel a reservation. So they claim true fraud when it's not true fraud. So obviously, back to the point of vetting chargebacks, it's absolutely essential here. Lastly, to kind of further that point, you need to make sure that you train your agents to be able to classify between true fraud and non-fraud, because you need to trust that they're making the correct decision there, because as I mentioned, it can get away from you very quickly if you have machine learning as part of your defenses.
And obviously, I would imagine as well, Brandon, that with the consumer attitude throughout the last couple of months, that must have changed significantly, where they might have been patiently waiting on hold on the phone for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour or so. They don't have that patience anymore, right? They are now, sort of concerned for their money, and are they going to get that money back? Is the airline going to go under? What's happening? Is the agency going to go under? What's the end result here? When am I ever going to see my money? So people are a bit antsy, I suppose, as well.
Exactly, yeah, and as we've mentioned, it's so easy now to initiate a chargeback. It's clicking a button on your phone, or you call into the issuing bank, and they actually might, with their questioning, they might lead you down a path to initiate a fraud chargeback when it's not true fraud. So yeah, it's all stuff to look out for.
Yeah, you're talking to customers. I think it's also important to recognize, for the first time, probably every bank agent is also sitting in the same, financial risk, feeling insecure. And so you also have that empathy. It's human nature. So now, you're taking a call from someone and you can relate, and they don't have any money. And so chargebacks involve humans, emotions get involved. It can be subjective. I think that's playing into what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this slide is sort of probably telling that story in pictures for us as to how people are feeling and how we need to react. And Monica, if you don't mind carrying on a little bit here on the fear that's being created here, how people the overwhelming customer service environments, etc.
Sure. So we know, more and more what's happening is we have, I almost think that if consumers were surveyed today and they were asked, is security more important, or is, speed and instantaneous more important? Most of us would say speed. And, we're trained to expect standards that are pretty impossible. If I order something, I want it pretty much the next day. If it's not here the next day, I'm considering they're not, living up to par. Well, one of the things just in terms with what we talked about, the consumer fear, overwhelmed support, all of these, really the standard that an airline needs to focus on, living up to is not being, as good as other airlines. In today's environment, you're actually competing with your customer's bank. And if you can't answer the phone faster, if you can't, satisfy their needs faster, then you need to beat them to the finish line, because this is your #1 competition. In terms of being able to prevent a chargeback, you have to do it better, and you need to do it faster, and probably faster is even more important. And Michael, I know you have tons of experience, and we were just talking about some of the stories that have gone on and statistics that you guys have tracked, just relating to, I know you guys have great customer support, but I'm sure it was very challenging. I mean, how have you been able to suffer through it without, having consequences moving to a remote?
Yeah, right, exactly. So when it first hit, like, many merchants out there, we were scrambling, as people couldn't come into the offices, and our call centers, had to be removed to a remote location. It obviously drove call volumes way up. So, Priceline takes very much pride in our customer service, because we do know that, things like, well, not like the pandemic, but certainly life happens. So we like to be there for our customers. But when everything hit, it was almost impossible to, just flip the switch. But we did get up very quickly, but we were able to, identify a correlation for call hold times and chargeback receipts. We were able to tie that back. And, we were able to share that information, with the customer service teams to, let them know that, the increase in call wait times is and was driving disputes. So obviously that, garnered a lot of attention, and, we were able to continue that very aggressive path to make sure that we were able to service our customers. But one thing, that we found really did work out well was the proactive communication. So when all these policy changes were happening, even if we couldn't get to the phone, we still, as an OTA, had the customer's email address and contact information. So then we were able to proactively communicate with our customers to not only let them know that, reaching us may be difficult at this time, and, we can certainly call them back at a time that's, better for them to be reached, but also to give them a status as to what their flight was, what the status of their flight was, just to kind of give them, just to ease some of that concern that they may have. Was the flight going to happen, a month or 2 months from now, or, if it was 2 days from now, and, them not being able to really get in touch with anybody when all of this was happening, being able to provide that proactive communication certainly helped. So those were the types of things that, we, as a, merchant, wanted to try to get out ahead of before the customer just got totally frustrated and just, to your point, said, I'm just calling my bank. I really don't care. I just want my money back. So those types of things certainly help.
And I think there's a lot to add to that, Michael, especially if you're in communication with your customer and they are willing to wait, right? They are willing to wait 2 months, 3 months, maybe for the next flight availability as it's being pushed out, the departure date. But they're willing to do that as long as you communicate to them, right? And
That's
you're
exactly right.
having an open discussion with them and say, look, if you're still interested in this trip, it's going to happen. It's just going to be later down the line. But if you don't have that communication with them, and or the customer isn't in the mindset of waiting that long, at least you've got that open line of communication, and they might actually tell you, look, listen, I'm not really willing to wait here. So is there another alternative? And you can then prevent that chargeback from happening because you guys have that open dialogue, right?
Something
Right.
something we were talking about as well, which I think if anybody that looks at the brand that Priceline has, I think they've done a great job of this. But I think it's more important than ever that every company humanizes themselves. That's really important because that it's much easier to ask for a consumer to wait if you're more humanized rather than, here's this big company, they can afford it.
Right.
It's just, and there's a tendency to create such efficiency with robotics and, but I think probably the human component is pretty valuable at this stage.
It is. I would just piggyback on that, saying that embracing the behavior of the current sentiment is crucial, especially in times like this. I mean, understanding the behavior, because we're all customers and we all have those same emotions and feelings. And just that one proactive text or email saying, we understand your trip's coming up and you may have some concerns, and here are the options to get some more information, whether it's logging through their profile, whether it's calling us at a different time or having us call them back, or so on and so forth. But you're absolutely right. Humanizing and understanding the what's driving the behavior is critical.
Yeah, just on that note, Michael, I worked with a tour operator early on out of New York City, and it's small, right? They're small, so they had a relatively small customer base, especially that was going through tours and so forth during that time period. They literally picked up the phone and tried to call every one of them where they had a phone number. They emailed every one of them, right? Again, keep in mind, they're not, they don't have the massive numbers of cardholders, but I love that proactive approach of saying, look, we've got to communicate directly, or we're going to be communicated to from their issuing bank. And it reap benefits for these guys. And I think that's a super important point, to just be proactive using whatever systems and communication tools you have.
Harlan, I'm glad you jumped in here, because as we move into the next slide, I really want to hear from you here as to how do we move forward in this new normal in reducing fraud and obviously revenue loss. If we look at that next slide, what do we need to do? Can you go through this for us, please?
Yeah, certainly. We talk a lot about conducting an internal audit. How many people, how many organizations buy their own product, right? Do you have someone that's going and clicking through? And this is not just for chargebacks and fraud, but it's really for everything, right? The user experience, the customer journey is really, really going to have an important effect. And we're all consumers, as you said. And so we will spot inconsistencies and problems throughout that journey as we conduct our audit, right? So reviewing past chargebacks is that's a great thing. We look at chargebacks as a symptom, right? It's a symptom. It's not the cause of the problem. It's a symptom. And if you know the real underlying cause, not just the reason code, you're going to come to better conclusions. Again, that's a data point, right? That's analyzing the data. Understanding what we call ERTs, errors, risks, threats, merchant error, processor risk, and revenue threats, right? If you're not processing refunds in a timely fashion, if your customer service scripting on refunds is not in line with what actually happens, you're going to get more chargebacks, right? So reviewing all of these things, as well as policies, refunds, et cetera, et cetera. Monica, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think you're doing well.
Oh, great. I like doing well. I'm sure, Michael, you all actually do these kinds of things all the time. Do you have any thoughts?
We do. I mean, we are in a position, from a resource perspective, to vet every single chargeback coming in, and doing a deep dive and looking at the receipt reason code, and then if we have to bucketizing it, if you will, and then sharing that data with the front end team. So if it's a disagreement in a policy, we'll share it with the teams that generate policies, see if there's any opportunity there. If it's a problem with a refund, something maybe was promised but the refund took longer than it was promised, we'll share that with the team who handles refunds. And if it's a customer service issue with long wait times, we'll share that data with those teams. So, and we've found that has proven to really provide changes, like on the front end, to really mitigate these disputes going forward. You know, we're really getting back to the KYC, hearing and understanding the symptom, as you said, what the customer is trying to relate in the form of a chargeback. We're taking that as an opportunity, not just as a bottom line expense and saying, well, it's a chargeback, okay, move to the next one. Priceline really embraces that as a opportunity to really use that data to make benefit.
Yeah, can I piggyback on something that Harlan said about refunds and, you know, how delaying in refunds can cause problems? That is huge in our industry right now, because airlines, a lot of airlines made the decision to not allow agents to do refunds through ARC, but to send the refunds to them directly for processing. And, you know, we know that a lot of those airlines didn't actually process those refunds. And now they're looking at it going, well, you know, we don't really even have the resources to process those refunds. So, okay, let's open it back up to agents. What happened to all those chargebacks? Because, you know, at least the US consumer typically is not going to wait for 4 or 5 months for their refund. So for those airlines that are on this call, I just want you to be aware of sort of the ramifications of limiting the ability for refunds to actually be processed, and then the resulting chargeback, and then opening that back up to allow refunds. The agency does not have visibility into what has happened in that entire transaction.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and you can likely end up with a chargeback that you refunded, that you also don't even have any bandwidth to defend, because you're also processing all the refunds that you should have refunded before.
Exactly.
And potentially another debit memo on top of that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and my advice to airlines is, when you've refunded a ticket that's already been charged back, don't be going back to the agent with a debit memo on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing ARC has done to support, to help us support this, right, Jennifer, is sort of the code that the COVID-19 identifier in the memo manager environment as well. So if there's any dispute or any rationale around that, the agent can toggle that or enter the COVID-19 as a reason for that potential debit memo.
Exactly. I mean, ARC early on realized we did not want to get in the middle of collecting on behalf of airlines on debit memos that were related to customer disputes over, you know, refunds not being received, the flight was canceled. ARC is not going to be collecting on behalf of airlines for those debit memos. And so it's really important for the airline to do the right thing to try to protect themselves. And they have oftentimes all the information they need to protect themselves without having to go back to the agent for something.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, another option, you know, that's been mentioned here is, you know, do a mystery shop, right? So if we move on to the next slide there, you know, what do we mean here by a mystery shopper? Harlan, can you take this one for me?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it before.
Yeah.
If you're not buying your own product, in tech they call it eating your own dog food. I don't understand how dog food has anything to do with technology, but anyway, whatever. But I think this is a super important point in the evaluation, the ongoing evaluation of 3 types of issues. First of all, the criminal fraud issue. You might even spot some gaps in how your processes work, and then you can, you know, work. I'm sure Brandon and his team do this all the time. What are the things that are allowing, you know, the fraudsters to come in, the true criminals, and take advantage of our systems and our processes? There's the merchant error thing that we talked about, errors, risks, and threats, and of course there's friendly fraud, which often has to do, and we've been talking a lot about it, with just policies or even habits. The statistic that only 16% of all consumers go to the merchant first before they file or they call their bank for a refund is a huge indicator that people want convenience over, I don't want to say integrity, but that's kind of what I mean, right? They want convenience. And so if we give them a more convenient route, if we communicate better how they can talk about a refund, I think we're going to service our customers, our consumers better in the future, right? So those kinds of things really help with the friendly fraud, and doing an audit of your policies and procedures. I think that's clearly fine, but having someone in your team that's just shopping the website, I think it's a great thing. Michael?
Yes. We do it.
Mystery?
We
you guys do that, Michael? Yeah.
We do, because it's very important not only to make sure that it's there, but it's there in a format, in a color, in a position that is easy to read and understand. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we are all consumers. We all make online purchases. Buying online travel, online air should be no different. And we should really just put that particular hat on, and every once in a while, do that mystery shopping experience, and then pretend that you do have a life experience where you do have to reach out to the merchant and call or text or email at a different time of the day or evening and see what the experience is. Document that and then share that. Because certainly what you as the mystery shopper may experience is undoubtedly experienced by other customers.
Right. I just want to, for the audience there, please feel free to type in your questions there. We will take them, and we are also able to take them during the session. So please continue adding your questions there, and we'll get to those. Michael, you mentioned earlier, as we move on to the next slide, you mentioned the buckets.
Yeah.
Can you expand real quick for us? I know we're coming up to time as well.
Absolutely.
What is your methodology around this, and how do you guys apply it at Priceline?
Right. Well, how Priceline does it is we manually vet every single chargeback case coming in. So I understand, different merchants that might not have the same resources, but depending upon systems that they may use for dispute management, it is important to bucketize the true criminal fraud, share those attributes with the front fraud screening teams. And then the subsequent friendly fraud / merchant fraud, sharing that information with the team as well. So if there is a delay in refunds, and our customer service agents or the customer service agents might be saying you'll see your funds within 48 hours, and we know, or the merchant knows, that it's going to take maybe a week or even longer, either change that script as we mentioned, or don't promise what you actually can't deliver. When it comes to friendly fraud around policies or what other factors may be driving that, put those in that bucket, and then make subsequent smaller buckets from that friendly fraud bucket, and share that information with the appropriate teams. All that leading into possible changes that could be made up front during the purchasing process, which is more aligning to the customer behavior of the chargeback.
Fantastic. Yeah. So as we move into the next slide there, and we touched on this real briefly a little bit earlier, it is that, communicate with your customer, communicate throughout the value chain, set expectations, set them clearly, and manage those going forward. I'm going to move to the next slide as well real quickly, just here from a time perspective, but, call centers are sort of taking the brunt of things here within COVID and trying to resolve all the consumer issues. Monica, I think you've got some insights here as well to share with us, and sort of best practices. What would you like to share here with the audience?
Yeah, I think that it's most important to just set the correct expectations. I think we have to recognize with the way that the climate has changed. Nobody would expect a miracle. So people are going to be understanding. What they're not understanding for at all is being told or being advised or expecting that the refund is going through. Like Jennifer said, it's a nightmare situation. And what we've seen, to Michael's point, the number one indicator is actually hold time and creating that scenario. Now, some good advice for those that they don't have the bandwidth, it's a very arduous process to process a refund. what customers want is they actually just want to know that their issue is being addressed, and they want to know, that they're important and have a good expectation. So what we've seen actually quite effective, especially in the European market, and with some of the smaller areas that we've studied in the US even, is, when you get a call from a customer, if you don't have the ability to get the refund process, and these agents they know what's going on, they're just trying to make that customer happy, because we all think making the customer happy and getting them off the phone is going to be successful. That is not successful unless you can follow through with it. So if you can't follow through, then you can actually deter a chargeback by just simply saying, you know what, let me give you a reference number. You can call us back like next Tuesday, or this is already in the queue. It's going to be processed. It will take 2 weeks, but that's going to get much better results than trying to convince the consumer that, this call, you've taken care of everything, just trust us. And then they're looking in their bank account every single day. They aren't seeing anything. It just creates an inflamed situation.
A lot of frustration as well. So I think, thanks for that, Monica. I think a question that hasn't come through through the question app here, but I'm sure is on everybody's lip, is as we move into the next slide, is how do I win my chargebacks? How am I going to win chargebacks? Can you elaborate or guide us a little bit here, please, Monica? What advice can we give to our audience here, and how can they be successful in winning chargebacks?
Sure. It's all about data, right? So if there's no way to achieve the highest win rate with full automation. That's just not even going to happen, because a chargeback by nature involves a human. And as much as we hear codes and reason codes, it's not very technically savvy. It's not technically sound. The word code doesn't really mean very much. So there's lots of subjective things that come about chargebacks. What's most important is to just really take each case that comes and know your chargeback, really get to understand what's caused that. And to Brandon's point, one of the things that is so important is a lot of companies have they'll look at fraud and they want to just be able to quickly provide that feedback right into their fraud engine, and they have machine learning that is going in, and then they're blacklisting all of these customers, and they're thinking, okay, we've now prevented future chargebacks from these cardholders. Well, that is actually a very devastating effect, because what you want to do in order to defend yourself from chargebacks and recover funds, you don't just want to recover funds. You want to rehabilitate that customer and save that customer. That's an important customer that was expensive to acquire. So find out how you can recover the funds and actually rehabilitate a scenario using the rules, so that it's not you against them. It's actually, here's the rules, and these are the rules. This is the rules of the game, and here's evidence. And then don't blacklist them, because statistics show if you're able to defend and recover funds from a friendly fraud chargeback, your customer will continue to do business with you. You aren't going to destroy your reputation and they'll never come back. And that's really your goal. That way you've captured your customer and you've also recaptured funds to create a balanced equation.
Perfect. Let's just stop here real quick. I've got one or two questions from the audience that I want to quickly get out here. The first one is a customer refund the same thing as a chargeback? And if not, what is the difference? Monica, are you able to take that?
So is a customer refund the same as a chargeback?
Yeah.
It feels like it.
It certainly does, yeah.
In today's industry, it does feel the same. So I would say no, it's very different. So a chargeback, you're going to get a fee, and you actually have the advantage of defending it. So here's another, just we get asked this all the time, and especially from the industry where, you know, other OTAs, they've had a lot of challenges because it's this balance of, hey, I want to make sure my customers are happy, but they don't really deserve a refund, and I don't want to charge back. And you know, this is a scenario that you really need to play by your own policies and your own rules. Your customer is going to be the most happy if you're still in business. That's number one. So if it means bending your policies and bending your rules to give them a full refund just to prevent a chargeback that you know is not legitimate, don't do it, because you're actually creating a bad behavior. And with a chargeback, then you know you are getting a forced refund in your bank account from your acquirer, but you have the opportunity to recover those funds if it was invalid. If you refund, it's gone. That money is gone permanently.
So I'll just add on to that, because we've seen a lot of people using the chargeback sort of process to get their refund when they were legitimately due a refund. So from a carrier perspective, if you're getting a chargeback for a ticket you should have refunded, you should accept that chargeback and move on. And yeah, so that's kind of what we've seen happening in COVID is if they were due a refund and you just didn't process it, accept the chargeback and move on. And then it looks like a refund.
Yeah, I guess that is a good point. I didn't think of it that way. There probably is some confusion in thinking, can I just rely on the chargeback process? It's not a good policy. Let me just say.
No, not a good policy. Do the refund.
Yeah, Michael, I think you've got a great saying around chargebacks as an opportunity, right? I'll let you say the whole thing, but can you explain to us a little bit here? How do you guys approach chargebacks, and what does it mean to know your chargebacks?
Yeah, so I mean, really, what it comes down to is to, and it all lays into know your customer. So the real opportunity here is to avoid the dispute from the beginning. Okay, the goal is obviously to win and be in the best position to win, but take the steps that can be taken to avoid the dispute. So whether it's a customer service, whether it's a policy enhancement, whether it's better, more proactive communication, that's the real opportunity as Priceline sees it, all while retaining the customer, building trust. The business, as Monica pointed out, the customer came to you first, through whatever decisioning process they took. So they will come back to you. So embrace that, know that, and use these disputes as a means of an extension of what the customer is thinking and what they are disagreeing with.
Perfect. And feedback and collaboration is also obviously key. I mean, that's sort of been a continuous theme here throughout this session. But Doug, if we move on to the next slide there, and I think Priceline, you guys do this quite well in collaborating across your departments. Can you just maybe elaborate a little bit there for us? How do you guys? What makes it successful for you?
Yep, just 30 seconds. We have a cadence with each of the teams listed here when it comes to chargeback receipts, and we have created certain KPIs that will highlight drivers of the behavior of chargeback receipts. And whether it's a weekly, semi-weekly, monthly cadence, we share these results. We share these KPIs, whether it's in a dashboard format or maybe something a little bit more manual, to let the front end teams know, the sales teams, the products teams, the legal teams, the policymakers, let them know what we are seeing with regards to chargeback receipts, to give them visibility into what they may want to change on the front end to fit what the customer sentiment is really telling us. And we've seen that's been super critical. In addition, I also want to mention we also have a cadence set with our acquirer to meet with them, just so that we're in laser alignment with any changes that may have happened. We know in the domestic market, it's, twice a year, changes happen, reason code changes, sometimes timings, so required supporting docs. So that's also important too. So, don't be afraid to collaborate the chargeback receipt information.
Perfect. Thanks. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. So, Doug, if we move on to the next couple of slides there, we'll be wrapping up now. And any last wise words here from our panelists? Who wants to go first? Any last closing remarks, please?
I will say, go ahead. I'll say 10 seconds, and then you can say the next.
Okay.
We'll just hold until we finish here and then hang up. So any of our attendees, please stay on the line. We won't close out just yet.
All right. So speaking of, we have a lot of experts here on the panel. I think, one thing that is incredibly important, this is going to help you win more chargebacks, understand how to prevent chargebacks. It ties into collaboration, but don't forget the value that, experts have. They live and breathe this stuff, and with the shortened time limits, don't be afraid to make sure that you have the most recent information, just specifically in rules. If you don't understand what is going on in the industry, it's pretty volatile because you have regional changes, government changes, card brand changes. I mean, changes just for your industry. So, it's a lot of things to stay on top of, and definitely, let's leverage our peers. This is a great time with this crisis where I think, people are more willing to work together, even as competitors, probably than ever before.
Yeah. Harlan.
Just 10 seconds, I promise. COVID has presented the most awesome opportunity to revise our policies and procedures. We need to have force majeure. We need to understand how does the government shutdown affect what we do as airlines, tour operators, OTAs, whatever. Those can all be put into a new policy and procedure approach that really will be, I think, a game changer for a lot of our clients.
Michael?
Yeah, I think that, it's, super important to really understand the behavior and not just look at, the dispute process as, not having, conveying any sort of customer, intention. I think that, whether you receive a chargeback with a fraud reason code or a chargeback with a non-fraud reason code, from, an operations perspective, from my team's perspective, it is imperative to really understand what is driving that behavior, quantifying that, and then sharing it with the appropriate teams to make the overall customer experience much more fulfilling.
Perfect. Thanks. Brandon?
Yeah, I'll say, if you have the bandwidth, vet and classify chargebacks and debit memos. You can learn so much information, and this information can be useful for pretty much your entire business. Yeah, if you have the bandwidth, I would definitely recommend that.
Fantastic. Jennifer, anything?
I think just number one, keep in mind the customer. If we all just keep the customer in mind as number one, we're all going to be a lot better off. And I could go on for days, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
Doug?
I'll just mirror what Monica mentioned about collaborating. So important in these crazy shifting times that and usually in my fraud webinars, I tell people, don't suffer alone, don't accept your loss, and that's the end of it. Find out what else is going on, learn from other people, right. Learn from your peers.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah, no, perfect. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think great session, and for the attendees who stayed on the line over the hour, we appreciate you. Thank you for staying with us, and all the panelists and my co-hosts. Thank you for your time and a great session. We'll talk soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.